We all here. Yes. Okay. I think we should slowly get started since we do have a shorter class today than usual, and at least in some ways. We'll have, of course, the guest lecture later on in the day, but we'll try to cover as much as possible before then. I hope you guys are all doing well and enjoying some spring weather and keeping up with coursework and family and life. Today we'll be talking about positionality as a factor that mediates experiences of the Qur'an. And this is kind of in keeping with our focus on mediation. So looking at the Qur'an not just as a scripture, but as a social object, right? That is experienced, interpreted, received by Muslims and humans generally in all kinds of ways. So our first class, we looked at sources and how those figured into Tafsir. We looked then at the context, socio-political context, and how that transformed readings of the Qur'an. And today we focus on positionality. So we'll try to get through as much as we can. We might not get through the whole class, but that's okay because our guest lecturer will be kind of taking us through in a different route. So we're getting the same content, but not necessarily everything that's written on the slides. And first we'll talk about what positionality is as a concept, and then thinking about what does it mean to interpret or read the Qur'an as a woman in particular. How does that make it different? These were our readings for this week, and positionality. So many of you or some of you might already know what positionality is. Could you perhaps chime in and let us know, or in the chat, how would you describe positionality in one sentence or so? Feel free to raise your hand or just write it down in the chat. What is positionality? Anybody? Or is it a new term? Okay, maybe it is a new term. Okay, good. So positionality really focuses on this question of your position. Oh, we have some comments in the chat. Yeah. So Maud says, how one's social position affects the perspective from which you look at the world. Precisely. So this question that all of us exist in a society, right? We might be individuals in some senses, but we are part of a larger community, a group, a state, a neighborhood, a race, an ethnicity, a religion in some cases. And what does that mean for how we experience the world, how we relate to others? So our position is, of course, shaped by all kinds of factors, and we have just a few of them listed here. And these are often the things that come up when we think about positionality, right? Your age shapes who you are in the world, how you see it, your level of education, your class, your gender, of course. So all these factors play a role in shaping who you are and how you see the world. So when we talk about positionality, essentially we mean this combination of these various factors. So not just one or two, but the way that they all intersect and create the particularities that is you, right? That makes you different from your next door neighbor, from even your own siblings, right? You are a different person. And that's because you have your own unique position in the world. But of course, with these different positions, there's also inequalities. So some people have, by virtue of their gender, by virtue of their race, by virtue of their class, have a higher social position or a lower social position. So these people have more access to power in society in various ways. And they're also more capable of asserting what constitutes truth, right? So, you might think of this as in a family, the parents have more of a say often in what's correct behavior than the kids. The kids might disagree, might, be frustrated, but ultimately the parents are in charge and they get to determine what is true, what is good. And it's the same thing if we think about society more broadly, right? Those who have more power are able to shape our knowledge. And of course, the study of the Qur'an is no different. So throughout history, Qur'an and the interpretation of the Qur'an, to be more specific, has been shaped through all kinds of course, power relations, and in particular ones that have a lot to do with the question of positionality, right? So have we had more men or women interpret the Quran throughout history? Primarily men, right? Have we had more people that were of an educated elite background as opposed to illiterate or slaves? Obviously more that were free, educated, literate men. And so this creates a certain kind of knowledge about the Quran, a certain kind of understanding of what the text means that is shaped by this positionality of these various individuals who were able to interpret it. And so positionality also relates to what's often called standpoint theory, and very much kind of along the same lines, that the standpoint is where you view the world from. So it's kind of this combination of factors of positionality. And this emphasis on standpoint reminds us that knowledge is never neutral. It's never objective, right? No one sees the world from above, from a kind of vacuum. We're all situated somewhere in some context and experience things through that perspective. And so the idea is that we can actually learn from one another, right? It doesn't mean we all have to ultimately be on the same page and completely agree with everything we say, but that someone who has a very different position in society might teach you something about the world, and you might teach them something, and that we can kind of collectively learn more about the world and about each other through these exchanges, as opposed to kind of taking one community's knowledge or one kind of person's knowledge, whether that's males versus females, whether that's the educated versus the uneducated, whether that's the rich versus the poor, rather than choose one of these, the more powerful one, trying to take partial knowledge from all these different positions, and always keeping in mind that this knowledge does come from a position, right? It doesn't come from a nowhere, so to speak. So that's where we'll start off in terms of thinking about positionality and standpoint theory. But so what this means is that when we think about texts that we read, we need to be conscious of who the authors are, right? So not just taking a text as a object removed from any kind of context, history, from the author, but actually understanding them in relationship and seeing, okay, I'm reading this book, who wrote this book, and what's their background, and where are they coming from, and what are the blind spots that they might have, or what are the connections to power that they might have, and seeing how that shapes the text. And so Amina Wadud, for instance, is one of the authors that we read for today. She was born into an African-American Christian family and became Muslim as a young woman. She studied Arabic and Islamic studies, both in the US and later in Egypt, focusing specifically on the Qur'an. And she describes herself as an activist academic, who is especially concerned with gender justice as a concept. And so thinking about gender as a category of thought, as she describes it, not just as a subject. So not just looking at the particular verses that talked about women, that's not what she's interested in, but in thinking about what do we mean by gender as a whole, and how does the Quran deal with this topic, and how can we kind of make sense of it in our own contemporary period. And you may have heard her name perhaps before, but she's known for kind of two controversial moments. So they're called for leading various prayers, a khutbah, so a Friday sermon initially, and then an actual prayer, a collective prayer in New York. And again, I give this background just to give us a sense of who it is that we're reading, because the positionality is what we're emphasizing today, right? It's part of the story that we're trying to tell. And we also read chapters of this text, Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Qur'an, by Abla Hasan, who is a Syrian American academic. She studied philosophy, language, and she did her PhD in Nebraska, where she now also teaches. And I won't say more about her because she'll be here with us in about an hour or less, in fact. So she'll hopefully be able to introduce herself. And I already had a chance to look at the various questions that you guys posted, and really excellent, engaging, thoughtful, and sometimes critical questions, which I think is great and will be wonderful for stimulating discussion. So I'm looking forward to meeting her and having that exchange. So with these two kind of figures that we have, right, these kind of contemporary women, they're both obviously still alive and present, they're both writing actively. We are connecting also to our previous class about this question of reforming tafsir, or interpretations of the Qur'an. So this idea that more and more modern scholars, modern Muslims, see the need to rework interpretations of the Qur'an that existed prior. So this idea that yes, the Qur'an is the divine word of God, it is timeless, it is universal, but that doesn't mean that we need to stick to the exact same interpretations that people gave, hundreds of years ago. That we need to read the Qur'an again, or for ourselves in the contemporary period, and see what kinds of new insights can emerge from this reading. And there's some slides today that I won't go kind of in detail, but you'll have these already on Brightspace and you can read them more closely later. But I'll kind of give us the overview just so we can get into the more kind of nitty-gritty of the content today. And so again, they're essentially reforming tafsir in the same way that, for instance, we saw Sayyid Qutb last class, we saw Rashid Rida, we saw Muhammad Abdo approaching Qur'an and approaching tafsir in very new ways, right, than what was previously done. And yet these particularly female exegetes, right, they're conducting exegesis, do so also in a way that is unique. And what I say is that they diverge from these earlier reformists because they emphasize their positionality, at least in the case of Wadud. And this is something that I'll focus on again, Wadud in particular, because we'll have a chance to talk to Abla Hasan in our conversation. So my presentation will be mostly about Amina Wadud. And so this question came up last class. I can't remember who it was that brought it up, this important and excellent point that we looked at Sayyid Qutb, for instance, extracting these timeless and universal principles from the Qur'an, but not recognizing his own positionality, right? Not recognizing that he himself was seeing things from a particular light, from a particular perspective, right? So for him, after extracting these universal principles from the Qur'an, the job was done. There was no more tafsir necessary because, now we have these universal principles and we just put them into practice. Whereas for someone like Wadud, who's actually a lot more attuned to the particularities of being human, of human experience, she argues that actually, yes, we can extract the universals, but then we have to make sure to retranslate them to the particular again, right? So yes, maybe modesty is an important universal concept that the Qur'an teaches, but what does that mean for this specific context that I'm in? And that can be different based on time, right? So based on right now is different than what was, for instance, considered modest 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but also by context, right? So when you're in a small conservative village, for instance, versus in a big urban city, versus in a country where people dress in a different kind of way. So this idea that what's particular to a context needs to be accounted for, right? That we don't just stay at the level of universal, we have to come back down to the specific and the particular. So what we'll try to ask in the next half an hour or so that we have is, what are the new ways that women like Wadud or like Hassan, what are the ways that they read the Qur'an in ways that challenge their predecessors, right? So they're not doing what Tabari was doing, right? Producing this kind of classical tafsir in which you have the hadiths that say so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, so-and-so said that about this specific verse. But they're also not doing what Rashid Rida is doing or what Sayyid Qutb is doing in trying to produce kind of these universal claims. They're doing something different. And so what does that do for how the Qur'an is read and experienced and mediated? Any questions so far? All clear? Okay. Please feel free to interrupt if needed. So in Amina Wadud's introduction, she identifies these two problems that we have, or that readers often have, when confronted with the Qur'an. So whether that's Muslims or non-Muslims, anyone reading the Qur'an, she says, has this problem. That one, according to the Tafsir tradition, the Qur'an is an inherently patriarchal text, right? There's all kinds of ways that its verses have been interpreted to justify very patriarchal, misogynistic practices. That's one problem. Another problem is that the status of Muslim women, of women in Muslim societies, according to many standards, is not ideal. So it's abysmal, or it's not in keeping with other societies. Muslim women do not get their rights in the same way as they might elsewhere, right? This is, again, a perspective. So this presents a problem, because for people who are committed Muslims, who do believe that the Qur'an is the word of God, and the word of a just God in particular, this presents a really, big dilemma. Does this mean that God is unjust, right? That God is patriarchal? Or does this mean that Muslims are actually not enforcing God's law in any way? And what does that say about societies that are called Muslim or perceived to be Muslim? And so there's all kinds of solutions that women, and women in particular, of course, there are some men writing kind of gender critical tafsirs, but it's primarily coming from women's pens. What are the various kinds of gender reformist readings of the Qur'an that emerge in response to these problems? So you have so the problem of patriarchy is a complicated one. So you have the problem of tafsir, right? So which is the question of interpretation, in which, as we were discussing before, the positionality of the people who interpreted the Qur'an historically, right, over all these many hundreds of years, has primarily been a male position. That's whose perspective, that's whose ideas, that's whose reading of the Qur'an we mostly have, right? Even way until the present day. I mean, I'm not sure if there might be, this is something I could probably research, if there is kind of any historical tafsir attributed to women. It's a complicated question that I don't know the answer to. But we primarily see it in the modern day, that women become more invested and kind of active in interpreting the Qur'an. So what happens is you then have these kind of tafsir discipline taking the male position, the male perspective as the norm, right? So in any kind of interpretation, men are considered the standard, the measuring stick, and women have to measure in relation to that in some way. So either they have to be different or distinct from men, or they have to be alike or equal to or unequal to. But in all these cases, we're not actually understanding women on their own terms, but always in relation to male figures and male imaginations. So that's kind of one problem of tafsir and the patriarchy. Another problem when the Qur'an is kind of read as a text in itself and saying, okay, well, let's not read the interpretation, let's just look at it as a text. Well, or what can be perceived as a problem is that the Qur'an is revealed in a gendered language, right? So all nouns have a female or a male form. People have a male or a female form in the language. And God, right, the word God and Allah in the Qur'an takes a male pronoun, right? So God is a he. Even in English, we refer often to God as he. So even though the Qur'an explicitly says that God is unlike anything else, unlike anything that your minds can imagine, we still have this problem of language, right? So thinking about levels of mediation and layers, this understanding of God that we have has to be mediated through some kind of human language. And in this case, it's Arabic, which has gendered pronouns. So what does that do for our conception of God, for our conception of male and female, of masculinity and femininity, of society? This is a big problem that arises for women in particular. The other issue, as we've said, is this problem of the status of women in Muslim societies. So we have two scenarios. If we understand Islam as whatever Muslims do, then as we can see in many of these societies and contexts, men and women are not equal, right? And Islam is unjust. So if the society is not able to actually produce an equal and just context for both men and women, then it can't be a just or equal society. But if we say, well, Islam is what the Qur'an says, then we have to think about whether the state of women in society actually reflects what is in the Qur'an. So the Qur'an describes social relations in certain ways. It describes the correct way of treating men, treating women, the correct way for the men and women to interact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, marriage practices, inheritance practices, all kinds of things. Do our societies reflect that, or do they not? So that's another issue that emerges when we think about the Qur'an and kind of its place in society. And then the other issue is, if the Qur'an is God's word, right? And if it is read as an unequal or unjust text, then is this the problem with God's word, with the Qur'an itself, or is this a problem of interpretation? How do we distinguish these different things? And in fact, this is something that the interpreters, so women like Amina Wadud, like Abla Hasan, like others who are part of the same field and writing on these topics, this is often the point that they return to throughout. So they look at the Qur'an and they find that the Qur'an asserts repeatedly, makes the claim that men and women are equal. They are equal primordially, cosmologically, eschatologically, spiritually, and morally. So they are full human beings and should not be measured or considered in relation to men or as less than men in any other way. That people are measured according to God and treated according to their level of piety, regardless of whether you are a man or a woman, a slave or a free person, educated or illiterate, that it's about your piety, and that humans generally are successors for God on earth. So Khalifa is the word used. And Khalifa has a connotation of being a ruler or governor. But the problem that we see, as Wadud points out in her text, is that women are actually not treated as governors, but as subjects to be governed, right? That they are actually not treated in many of these societies as independent, full human beings, but rather as minors or as somehow needing supervision or kind of governance in a way that they can't themselves provide. And what she's interested in doing is exploring why and how this happens and how this connects to what the Qur'an says. So is this actually a reflection of the teachings of the Qur'an, or is this just some cultural practice which exists in all kinds of societies, right? Patriarchy, unfortunately, is prevalent even in the most advanced and modern societies. We can point out all kinds of problematic distinctions between how genders are treated in society. But these women, of course, are in particular concerned with the Qur'an and with Islam and how this tradition and Tafsir and the Qur'an specifically sanction or don't sanction certain ways of treating women in society. So in response to this problematic kind of position or perspective of the Qur'an on women, right? So it's kind of seen as a problem. There's two ways to go about it. One way, which we can kind of classify as the traditional perspective, and traditional in quotation marks, because that's really not a great term to use, but just to keep things simple. So one perspective would see that having tafsir, and having the Qur'an, so that basically there is no problem to be solved, right? So that there is no patriarchal perspective in the Qur'an, there is no patriarchal perspective in the tafsir, and that there's no problem if it's primarily men interpreting the Qur'an, and that actually their society is built on hierarchies, and that the Quran can affirm these hierarchies. So can affirm that some people should be in charge of others, some people should have more power than others. And it just so happens that men view themselves as in a position of power as compared to women. So the Quran is read in a way to affirm this position of power and this perspective on the world. This can be one take. Another take, which can be written by secular, liberal, or Orientalist critics, right? So people who don't see the Quran as sacred can just simply critique the Quran, can just say, well, this is not a great text, it's unjust. We can just, in the same way that we have other texts that say horrible things about how society should be organized and governed, we can just throw it out or critique it or set it on fire, as people are doing in Sweden at the moment, that this is just a text full of problematic ideas and we can get rid of it. That can be one perspective. Another perspective, which can be critical, but which can come from Muslims who do have some kind of relationship to the text that is sacred, right? So they're not fully able to kind of throw it out, so to speak. They can develop alternative ways to read the Quran or to interpret it that challenge these traditional perspectives, right? So taking this tafsir of the last 1400 years, these various perspectives and positionalities of the people interpreting the Quran and saying, well, maybe they were saying things that were particular to their contexts, that were tainted and shaped by their positions in the world. And maybe there can be different ways to actually read the Quran. And maybe, in fact, it is a just text, because if we do believe that God is just and that this text is from God, then it must make sense. It must add up that there isn't, patriarchy being called for in this book. But of course, there's all kinds of debate for how you then reinterpret the Quran or how you interpret it, right? We shouldn't think about it in terms of reinterpreting it, because that assumes that there is one original or standard perspective that we start with, but that you read the Quran with a fresh perspective and you provide an interpretation that is equitable, that is just, that is egalitarian. And that's the primary concern of these various authors that we are reading today. Okay, I'll just pause for a second to make sure we're on the same page. Any questions so far? We clear? Yes, please, Seema.
Yeah, so in the previous point, so you say it's about the different reading, right? But is it very weird to say that maybe a lot of people throughout time have already read the Quran differently, but they were just not in a position of power to voice themselves? So it's not about the reading, but it's about the society changing so that actually people can come together and make a stand or give more expression to these thoughts, but not about the reading in itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. So this kind of relates to this point I was bringing up earlier of, I don't know whether there exists, for instance, a pre-modern interpretation of the Quran by a woman or by someone, let's say a slave, or by someone who was, of a different social class or race that was in less position of power. Because that probably wouldn't have survived, right? That would have been overshadowed by all the other correct forms of knowledge. And that's what we have today. But exactly as you're saying, yes, various kind of social transformations, political transformations change the distribution of power in society that actually allow certain people to speak up and to have their voices heard in a way that was not possible in other contexts. So that's a really good distinction that you point out, that it's not necessarily that it was never interpreted in this way before, but that it's now able to be, published in a book, right? And someone can publish it and they can say that what they think, and then it can go online and people can buy it and people can share it, etc. Whereas obviously it was a very different world in the past. So great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. So what these kind of contemporary reformists are trying to do is develop what many of them call a female inclusive Quranic hermeneutics. And so there's all kinds of terms that are used either by the individuals conducting the tafsir or attributed to them. So sometimes it's called feminist exegesis or tafsir. Sometimes it's called gender justice or gender egalitarian tafsir. So there's different words, but maybe female inclusive is the most broad one, right? So the idea that including female perspectives, including female positionality in how we understand the Quran, how we read it, right? And particularly the hermeneutics. So not just in the actual content that we're reading, but in the very way that we're approaching the text. That's when we should start thinking about gender and power and inequality. So the way that many of these scholars take this critical perspective is firstly by doing this very important move of distinguishing the text and interpretation of the text. And this is very critical because, of course, if you're a Muslim, right, a believing, committed Muslim, which not many, but all these people are, right? This is a kind of theological discussion. It's not necessarily an academic one where people are supposedly objective and removed from their topic. This is one that they themselves believe in and are participating in, right? Speaking to members of their community. So if you are a committed Muslim, then at the very kind of fundamental definition, you believe that the Quran is the word of God, right? It's a divinely revealed word. So by definition, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to call the word of God a patriarchal or unjust text, right? That doesn't fit with the concept of God in Islam. God cannot be unjust, and therefore the word of God cannot be unjust. So the very first and important step is distinguishing between God's word, the text, and the interpretation of the text, and saying that the problem of patriarchy is in the interpretation and not in the text itself. And then where you go from there differs. So there's very different perspectives on how to then kind of make sense of what do we do with these problematic interpretations? How do we read Quranic verses that seem to be patriarchal or seem to be problematic? And so if you read Wadud and if you read Hassan, you already perhaps have a sense of how their methods are quite different. So they don't necessarily, or they wouldn't necessarily agree on the methods or on the conclusions that they reach, even though they start from the same point. But Hassan in particular, and of course this is from my reading, but we can talk more with her when she's with us, is focusing on the text. That's her solution, saying we forget the history, we forget the context, we forget everything, and just literally turn to the word of God. What is this telling us? The language, the specific word choice, the prepositions, and any historical context should be eliminated. Whereas what Wadud does is quite different. She is attempting to think about and I think it's in the next slide, she's trying to produce this female inclusive Quranic hermeneutics from a different perspective. And yes, and she makes this point through this concept of prior texts. So she argues firstly that we all approach a text, whether that's the Quran or otherwise, through prior texts. That's number one. That the Quran is a universal text that was revealed to a particular community, and I'll explain in detail these in just a second. And that to avoid infinite relativism, right, this idea that we can just interpret, anyone can interpret the Quran to say whatever they want, that there needs to be a method by which we go from this particular community that the Quran was revealed to, go up to a universal concept, and then go back down to our particular context that we exist in today and that we need answers for. So again, if we want to think back to Sayyid Qutb, for instance, and how we were reading him, he did step 1 and 2 here. He went from the particular to the universal, but he didn't do this last step. He didn't take it back down to the specifics and the very different contexts in which people exist and need guidance for. He assumed that, okay, once we have the universal, tenets of the Quran, the universal principles, we can just stop there and then the rest will fall into place. So to make this more concrete, we'll go to the next slide. So what Wadud means by prior text is essentially what we've been talking about when we talk about positionality or standpoint, that the idea that we don't come to things completely blank. We have all kinds of assumptions. We have all kinds of knowledge that we approach things with, experiences with, right? So whether it's language, whether it's culture, whether it's our own personal experiences, circumstances, our background, that all shapes how we read a text, any text, whether that's you're reading Shakespeare, whether you're reading the Bible, whether you're reading, anything you can think of. And of course, I'm using the word text, but that can also be replaced with, a non-literary text. So seeing a movie or listening to a piece of music, that these prior texts mediate our experience of other texts. The other point that she makes is that each tafsir is a product of a reading of the Qur'an alongside prior texts. So that really, when you're reading a tafsir, you're not just getting what the Qur'an says, you're getting these other prior texts of that particular individual. And so you see that this kind of relates a lot to what we're talking about in our class with this question of mediation, right? That there are all these layers that mediate the Qur'an and your experience of it. And prior texts are one of them. So what Wadud is saying is that, well, no one can have a fully objective, fully accurate reading of the Qur'an. No one. Everyone is shaped by their positionality. But the problem is that sometimes some people, some individuals, some communities take their particular worldview and enforce it as a universal or as the only permissible reading. And that's a problem. That's when you get power. That's when you get one position that dominates all the others. And so this is kind of what she's trying to find a solution for. How do we develop a method that prevents some particular interpretations becoming the only interpretation? So she says that developing a method that focuses on the Qur'an's universal message of Tawheed, right? So focusing on this concept of Tawheed, of unity, right? Which is also the question of the unity of God, which is what the Islamic tradition is premised on. And that thinking about this concept of Tawheed and how it permeates and infuses the entire text as a whole, as opposed to just a verse by verse reading, as for instance, Al-Tabari did, that is how we need to approach the text. But that also this concept of Tawheed, right, which is the universal principle that Wadud identifies as the most essential kind of point of the Qur'an, it needs to, again, be extracted and applied through a method. Because otherwise, each person will just say, well, okay, this is what Tawheed means, and this is how I interpret it, and this is how it needs to be interpreted according to everyone else. So she develops a method. She says that we need to understand, firstly, the specifics of the early Islamic context, because that's the community to which the Qur'an was revealed. So we can't just throw it away and say, okay, it doesn't matter, we don't need to know anything about it, and just read the text and we'll get it. No, she says we need to understand how God was speaking to this particular community. We need to understand what is the universal message from this particular conversation God was having with this community. And then we need to, again, translate that universal message to our own society. And this provides a reading of the Qur'an, so a reading, rather than the reading, right? So she kind of critiques this idea that we can just interpret the Qur'an once, close up shop, close up the printing presses and say, okay, that's it. Everyone else can just relax for the future. No, that each society, each community, each individual needs to be doing this on a kind of regular process. And so, again, this point is that the text, so the Quranic text itself, and its principles, whether that's Tawheed, the larger overarching principle, or the sort more specific ones, whether justice, equity, harmony, etc., that they remain constant, they remain throughout the text and through all interpretations, but the way that they're applied changes. So I won't go into detail here, but essentially, to give you the example, and you can maybe have, I don't know if you already read this one or if it was in a different chapter, I can't recall, but essentially, she looks at this question of modesty and what it means to dress modestly, which also came up in the chapter by Abla Hasan that you read, and goes through this question of, okay, what did dressing modestly mean in the Arabian context in which the Qur'an was revealed? What is the principle that emerges from the various regulations and rules and commands that God revealed in the Qur'an? It implies a principle of modesty. And what does modesty mean in the various contexts that we exist in today, right? So how do we then kind of go through this equation on all kinds of topics, whether that's modesty, whether that's justice, whether that's equality, et cetera, et cetera. So this is her method, and this is just one of many, many other methods that kind of people who have tried to develop female inclusive tafsirs. And so we're taking it as a case study, but that doesn't mean that it's the only one, right? And this is why I'm also excited for us to have a chance to talk to Dr. Hassan in about 10 minutes or less, because she does provide quite a different perspective, I think. Marlies, please.
I read at the bottom of the text that is now on the PowerPoint slides, the movement from principles to particulars can only be done by the members of whatever particular context a principle is to be applied. I think that is a significant statement. Could you elaborate a bit?
Yes. So I think is essentially what I understand from this sentence is that someone, from one context cannot make determinations for someone from another context on what is appropriate and what's not, because they actually don't know that context and they're not from it. And you need to be part of that society and community in order to actually understand and make sense of what that specific setting needs, right? So what is considered, for instance, modest clothing, to keep up with this example, in one setting might be very immodest in another, and vice versa. Even if you're actually not changing the amount of skin really that you're showing, right? Just something like, the color that you're wearing, right? Or a certain kind of, if you're wearing a fabric that's shiny or something like that, might be viewed very differently. And so I think that's what that sentence here is saying, that it's not just about developing these universals, but in having them translated to particulars by the people of that community themselves. Yes.
Sorry, I think when you think through, that can make it very difficult for members of that particular community to protest against something which is called appropriate. Mm-hmm. Because how can you protest against something when you can't apply to principles that are applied in other communities, for example? So you have no way of escaping your not dominant position.
In a sense, meaning that it can lead to a kind of relativism where you have people saying, well, this is appropriate to our context and this is the way it is, and maybe you can do things differently elsewhere. Yeah, that's definitely a concern. And I mean, this is a question that she's essentially trying to address, right? That yes, we have to be focused on our particulars, but she's really also concerned with trying to avoid relativism. Because if you say everything's fine and everything's possible, then you can take the same text, right, the Qur'an, and justify it to, do all kinds of things on one end of the spectrum to the other, which of course happens, right? This is what happens with all religious texts and all texts that are kind of important, right? So you can take Marx's Capital, and you can have people argue for completely different kinds of what it means to be a communist or socialist or to follow Marx with the same text. So I think it's a big challenge, as you say, and I think that's what these tafsir interpreters are trying to deal with, right? How do we make sense of this text in a way that's specific, but also that maintains its integrity as a text, right? Where we just we don't use it to say everything. And I think that's what will be interesting in our discussion with Dr. Hassan, is that her attempt or her method is going to the text itself, right? Which is not necessarily what Joud does, right? She does partly that. She does Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an, so she looks at other parts of the text, she draws out universal principles, but she's not a linguist in the same way that Hassan is. So we'll hopefully get a chance to talk more about that. So I think, and you can maybe read this slide on your own, because I think you should have at least 4-minute break. I'm sorry, we don't have more time than that, but maybe we can take a 4-minute break, because we'll be then joined by Dr. Hassan very shortly after. Is that okay? Sorry about the short break. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys and your questions. Okay, see you soon.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Joud. You're muted.
Wa alaikum salam. Nice to see you.
How are you? Thank you
Good,
for
very
inviting
good.
me.
Thank you so much for joining. I know it's very early there.
You know, I have 3 boys, 3 kids, so this is my daily routine.
Well, thank you then for taking a break from them for the next hour and giving
Thank
us
you
your
so
time.
much. Thank you so much. I zoomed in earlier anticipating problems, but it was easy. I didn't have even to enter the password or anything.
We welcome
Love
everyone
it.
in the Netherlands. Yes, exactly. No, great. So usually we have quite a longer, like we usually have about a 15-minute break in these classes. It's very different than North America, but I think 5 minutes is enough for students today. And then we can hopefully turn to the...
How long should I'm going to talk for 15 minutes, something very short, and then
Sure.
we open it up to
Yes,
questions.
perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah. No,
So
we
nice
have...
to meet you in person.
Likewise. I mean, I hope we
Finally.
can meet actually in person one day, but
Inshallah,
this is
in
good for
Arabic,
the
yeah.
meantime.
Yeah. I'm grateful for technology, you know, I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, it's true.
It's amazing opportunities. Like 2 days ago, I zoomed to Texas, to a classroom. I asked people to Zoom to my classrooms. Before that, it was once a year in a conference. You barely can afford that, and that's it, right?
Very true, very true. No, it's also nice when people, again, share their time, right? Because yes, we have the technology, but so many people are so overwhelmed and busy and have all kinds of things on their plate that they just don't want an extra thing. But it's so valuable, I think, for us as faculty, for students to actually be able to have these conversations. And so I'm not sure when you tuned into the class, but I can maybe give you a sense of, until the rest of the students return, of how it's structured or what we're doing. I think maybe I've explained a bit on the question of mediation. So a little bit.
Whatever works for you. Yeah, whatever works for you.
Well, just to kind of give you a sense of what we're doing. So we're looking at the Qur'an, that's the kind of focus of the class, and looking at the Qur'an specifically as it's a social object, in the sense that it's not just a scripture, not just a divine text, but something which is read and experienced and mediated through all kinds of social processes, right? That it's not just God said this and therefore it is in the world, but that it comes through various kinds of layers that we actually experience the Qur'an. And of course, power is a big part of that question. And so today, of course, our class specifically is thinking about the question of positionality. So what does our positionality in the world, how does that shape how we experience the Qur'an, but specifically with the question of tafsir, right? So many years and centuries of specifically men interpreting the Qur'an. What does that do for what the Qur'an says, and how have people kind of tried to speak back to that as you do in your work so nicely. So yeah, very excited. And we have already lots of questions from the students.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So let's see if most people are back, maybe another minute or so, and then we can see. I think they're slowly coming back now. Maybe if we start and then they can slowly tune in. Yes, perfect. Okay, so hopefully most of you are back now. As you see, we of course have already the pleasure to start talking with Dr. Abla Hasan. I wanted to introduce you, but I think it's better if you introduce yourself because then you can focus on what you're interested in. But Dr. Abla Hasan is an associate professor at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And she very kindly agreed to join us and discuss her book that we read the introduction and 2 chapters of, so Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Qur'an. And we read this in relation to Amina Wadud. So those are you are the 2 readers that we have in mind today in terms of content. And we're just very thrilled to have you here and would love to hear more from, where this book is coming from, where you're coming from, and then have plenty of questions to ask you. So I leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to your awesome classroom. I'm grateful as we were sharing together. I'm so grateful for technology to allow these opportunities. So I teach Arabic language and culture for Nebraska University. I teach women in the Quran. I teach love and sexuality in the Arabic culture. And I'm so honored that my book is taught in your classroom along with Amina Wadud, because she's one of my big heroes, as you can see in the book. And I use the methodology of going back to the original text in order to understand the Quran. And maybe this can allow me to start briefly, I would say, addressing the important question you suggested for me to start with, and we can move from this to Q&A from audience. So what does it mean to read the Quran as a woman, right? And let me add to this a couple of other questions that this question reminded me of. Like, does it matter in the first place if someone is reading the Quran as a woman or as a man? And more importantly, should it matter, right? Who can read the Quran best? Who has the right to read the Quran? Who can claim the best reading, the best understanding of the Quran? Because clearly what I mean here by reading the Quran, understanding the Quran, and the authority of interpreting the Quran. And this question is very important. I loved when you suggested to start with this question, because reading a text that is considered a religious text means the authority, means you speak the authority. So if we limit those who can read the text or interpret the text to the elite, the social elite, whoever the social elite is, this will indicate a whole set of consequences. So let's go to the beginning first, right? Before we can answer the question, what does it mean to read the Quran or to attempt to interpret the Quran as a woman? Let's go to the beginning with the Quran in order to understand what does it mean to try even to claim that I understand the Quran, right? In the Quran, true believers are described as those who believe in the unseen. And I'm quoting from chapter 2, verse 2. And those who believe in the revelation sent down to you and what was sent before you. And I'm quoting from 2:4. So true believers in the Quran are not described as those who know the unseen, right? Those who believe in the unseen. Because no one, and those who believe in the revelation, not those who know the revelation, right? Because this is a very high goal, right? No one, I argue, should claim that they know the unseen or they understand the revelation, including the text, unless one is either too ignorant or too arrogant to claim that. So believers are praised for believing in both, right? Also, let's remember that from a Quranic point of view, for certain knowledge or religious knowledge doesn't come during this lifetime. It comes at the end. I'm referring to what is named in Arabic as yaqeen, certain knowledge, right? As we read in verses like in 102 and 102 verse 5, 102 verse 4. It comes only after you go into your graves, the Quran says, right? So this is an attempt just to remind to be humble, to remind ourselves to be humble while approaching the Quran or claiming an interpretation of the Quran. So in order to make any headway in understanding religion, any religion, one essential assertion must be kept in mind. There is no real and tangible sense of definite and a change resistant epistemic religious knowledge that we can capture and arrest at any current moment. At best, there are speculations, epistemic speculations. The challenge of concealed religious reality, I argue, is at the core of our test as human beings. This is religion by definition, because making sound choices while provided nothing but general divine guidance is the ultimate success of humans as God's deputies on earth, which is the same reason, the core reason of our existence, as we read in chapter 2, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, I'm going to place on earth a successor. So main core concepts in any religion, including but not limited to Islam, can remain ambiguous even for the most faithful believers. Most importantly, the epistemic gap between our human understanding of the text and the transcendental nature of the religious text lies at the heart of what religion as a test and as epistemic hardship means. Criticizing others' subjective and even prejudiced readings of the Quranic text doesn't by itself render our readings more complete and more perfect, right? The gap between the religious text and our understanding of it is not a mere theoretical observation, I should add, but a proven historical fact as well. More importantly, the variety and even the contradicting nature of interpretations are not the mere result of conflicts in understanding. Many times, they're motivated by pragmatic attempts to use and even to manipulate authority by claiming an or the exclusive right to the religious text. In other words, many times, the variety of the human understanding of the same religious text is not the result of mere theoretical schisms per se, but an intentional attempt, I would say, to reshape the text for pure pragmatic reasons. This applies to everyone, we should keep in mind. And now I can go back to the original, very important question. Who does have the right to read the text, men or women? I say no one, but the text itself, right? The keys to decode the text must be found in the text itself. Otherwise, we can't even eliminate that I'm reading the text in a subjective way, right? We can't criticize patriarchal interpretations of the text and just be satisfied by replacing them by feminist interpretations of the text. We're going to be playing the same game again, but after we criticized others for doing that. And therefore, in decoding the egalitarianism of the Quran, I stress the importance of reviewing the interpretive linguistic choices that jurists and exegetes over the last 14 centuries have adopted to semantically reshape the Quranic text. My research, and I'm going to be happy to get feedback from you. My research concludes by questioning the credibility of many of these choices and the so-called unconditional validity of many of them. I argue that many patriarchal interpretive approaches to the Quran were dominated by socio-political factors alien to the intrinsic semantic values of the text itself. But the question is now how to deal with this problem, right? Could we and should we propose counter-feminist readings of the text? Would that respond to the many problems one can find in medieval, classical, and even modern interpretations that failed to respond to the text? No. The simple answer is no, because again, we will be then committing the same mistake that we've been criticizing so far. We're going to be committing nothing but a logical contradiction, right? So the way out of this is to try to be fair to the text and to start by isolating the text from the history of its interpretation. A couple things that can help us in such a hard task, right? To allow the text, I would say, or the Quran to speak for itself. First of all, the generality, observing the generality of the Quranic language. The Quranic language intentionally speaks a minimalist language that fits perfectly understanding the Quranic message as a universal message. There is a huge claim that almost all schools of Islam believe in Quran as a universal message. And the message of Islam as a monotheistic Abrahamic message that complements previous messages and adds to them without contradicting them, but it fits the needs of every culture, every congregation, every community to the end of all times. How can any text be able to do that if it's not general and general enough to allow for what fits every people in every generation, right? So the Quran speaks a very general language that the Mufassirin, the exegetes, only trapped when they tried repeatedly to translate the generality of the Quran and to lock the general terms into terms that fit their time and their place. That is a human tendency that I understand and I appreciate. And it's inevitable. We have to do that. We have to try to approach an abstract religious text and try to make sense of it. We need it to speak to our times, but we can't idealize our understanding and we say, my understanding should apply to all times, all cultures, everyone. It's the general term, the general concept that I can drive, I can conclude from the Quran, and I apply it to my time, but I don't make it a condition for everyone to apply what applies to my time to be equally applicable to their times. So the abstract, open-ended textual style of the Quran doesn't allow really for narrow cultural normativity. The semantic style of the Quran is intentionally structured to allow for this open-ended interpretive capacity. And this is all abstract, so I'm going to try by using, try to explain by using examples. So for example, if we, as I mentioned in the book, the rule for healthy conduct in marriage, which I take it as the golden rule for healthy marriages, is to treat your wives according to ma'ruf, which is mentioned in 419 and in 229. Now, what is the meaning of ma'ruf, right? So the guidance, the general guidance is to treat your wife according to ma'ruf. Ma'ruf is a very general term. Ma'ruf comes from the root, the Arabic root arifa, which means to know, to know. In translations, you find it translated as according to what is fair and kind. In Arabic, when you say do me ma'ruf, it means do me a favor, please. So, but what is fair and kind, right? it's very general. Because what is known, let's remember, ma'ruf, what is known by who? By your community. So husbands are asked in the Quran to treat their wives according to ma'ruf, according to the best standards known by their own communities to be the standard to treat your wife, right? Which shouldn't and can't be the same. What is appropriate in one culture won't be appropriate in another culture, right? What is fair now won't be even applicable after 100 years or even 10 years. So treat your wives according to ma'ruf, to the best standards, known standards, approved standards, according to your community. And the Quran, leave it as there, right? Another example in the Quran is the word adil, which means just. As we read in 458, the word in the Quran was used to indicate a general Quranic guidance or criterion for sound political ruling, which is the generality of the word says, when you rule people, seek justice, seek adil, right? And the Quran leaves it as there, like seek justice. But what is justice? Justice now is not the same like justice before 100 years or after 100 years or even less than that. So as long as you're seeking justice according to your time, the highest, it's like the highest goal, the highest purpose. This is the guidance of the Quran. The Quran is not there to replace your human agency, to tell you this is justice and this is what you need to follow and we need to follow, because then this is a mere replacement of our purpose on earth. As I mentioned in chapter 2, the scene of creation, of creating Adam itself starts with God announcing in paradise the reason by saying, I'm placing a deputy on earth, a successor on earth. What does it mean to be successor? You will be leading how you rule this earth as a deputy of God himself. You're going to be making laws, norms. You're going to make sense of things. You're going to define justice for yourself. So the ultimate goals are there, I would say, in the Quran as motivations to motivate people to do their best, but it's not spelled out literally what to do and how to do it, because then our human existence on earth won't have even a meaning, right? What other things that can help us in the Quran with this hard task of interpreting the text, right? So I started by observing generality in the Quran, the Quranic minimalist style, and respecting that. So when you fill in the gaps with what fits you, don't assume it's going to fit everyone else. The second thing is to give no authority when it comes to interpreting the Quran other than the text itself. Therefore, I use a methodology I refer to as the semantic completeness of the Quranic language. And I take it as a very strict application of Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, or interpreting the Quran by using the Quran. Now, it's a well-known methodology which seeks understanding the Quran by eliminating, I would say, the distract from everything else, by limiting yourself to the Quran. But I take it personally, and I've been criticized for this, I take it personally to the extreme. And I do believe that there is a potential in the Quran. It's hard because here's the thing. Many people are in the habit of, I'm gonna borrow this from hadith, this from history, this from this imam, that from that imam. I'm gonna put everything together and now I can understand the Quran. I argue to do the opposite. Let me start with the Quran first, and let me double check if all the other elements that we borrowed from here and there fits that. If it explains the Quran, that's fine. But unfortunately, many times what we borrowed are cultural elements, are personal choices of people. Not only they don't fit the Quranic message, many times they contradict the Quranic message, right? So going back to the text, there is a huge potential in the text to be able to understand the text without using anything other than the text itself. What we're going to use details. But who said that the Quran is obsessed in details in the first place? Again, I'm using a very abstract language. Let me give you an example of this. And the example here of trying to understand the word "ada," which will have a huge consequence on the topic of modesty. As a veiled Muslim woman, I'm asked like repeatedly, almost every time I show in, like I appear in any talk or lecture about hijab, and I'm sure you have the same experience, Dr. Joud, yourself. So I'm going to be addressing a little bit the reason for wearing hijab or headscarf or modesty from the Quran, right? And it's very important to understanding from within the Quran, because then we can eliminate the distract, which has serious consequences. In 3359, we read that Muslim women are recommended to wear headscarf or to appear in a modest way so they can be recognized and to avoid adha. And I'm going to leave it in Arabic as it is now, adha. So what is adha that Muslim women are trying to avoid by wearing hijab? Unfortunately, many times it's interpreted as to avoid sexual harassment, right? And you can immediately now tell why it's dangerous to go with this interpretation. Why? Because it's helping what is known as the rape culture, or these attempts to victim blaming, right? Victim blaming or demonize women for harassment. So probably you were not modest enough and therefore you were harassed. So portraying women that they should be responsible for what happens to them because they're dressed in a certain way or not dressed in a certain way. It's not just for women, but not only it's not just for women, definitely it's not Quranic. This is not the meaning of adha. If you go to many interpretations and translations of 3359, you will find this interpretation and translation. And many times what happens, especially to non-native speakers of Arabic, when they try to read the Quran, they read the Quran and they think they're reading what corresponds to the text. When you read the Quran, guys, you read a translation of an interpretation of the Quran. You're not reading the Quran. And so if there are faults in that, if there is something missing along the way or added along the way, so you won't be able to notice that. It happens even to native speakers of Arabic when they're just recommended just recite without trying to analyze or to investigate what you're reading or to double check what you're reading. So adha probably doesn't mean harassment. This is not the reason Muslim women wear hijab, right? A piece of cloth won't protect you from men's uncontrolled sexuality, right? So it's not the reason. It can't be the reason. But what is the reason then? If we go to the Quran itself, and if we try to use the Quranic word as a key to understand the Quranic word, probably we can understand the puzzle. If I go to other verses in the Quran and I try to understand what does the Quran mean by adha? So when adha is used in other verses, what does it stand for, right? When we go to 3:111, we read, they will not do much harm even if they come out to fight you, right? لن يضركم إلا أذى. So they won't harm you. They will cause you only adha. So now we started a little bit, getting closer to the meaning. So adha doesn't mean harm. It means annoyance, probably, something less than harm, right? Conflicts, probably misunderstanding, right? Because it says they won't harm you, right? They're gonna cause you only adha. And this is addressing the conflict between the Muslim community and outsiders, right? They won't harm you, it says. They won't cause you adha, right? Another place is in 2:222. If they ask you, Prophet, about menstruation, say it's adha, right? So avoid women during menstruation and until they're cleansed, right? When women go through menstruation, a woman is not considered sick right? And by the way, say it's أ.د., right? So menstruation is described in the Quran as أ.د. A woman is not considered sick. You don't go to the emergency room for those days of the month if everything goes as normal, right? But it's annoying. I won't say it's the best time of the month, especially for intimacy, right? Women are annoyed. They have switches in their moods, right? So it's annoying. So to put the two things together, I can come back to the verse on hijab, and I can say with confidence that women are recommended to dress in a modest way, not to avoid sexual harassment, a criminal activity that is harmful and it is criminal and dangerous and can be tolerated. Women are recommended, Muslim women, of course, are recommended to wear in a modest way or to dress in a modest way only to avoid annoyance, to avoid misunderstanding, to avoid miscommunication. Muslim women are asked in the Quran to commit to serious relationships. No sex outside of marriage, no casual sex, right? So Muslim women are interested only in serious relationships ending with marriage. So being asked to, endless dating or casual sex, something doesn't fit with like a Muslim woman who takes Quran as her guidance, doesn't fit her interests. So to avoid awkward situations when you date someone probably for a long time and it's not going where you want it to go, you're giving a non-verbal visual indication of your high expectations in relationships, right? This is one of the reasons. But definitely it's not to avoid harassment. And definitely doesn't mean that women who doesn't dress in a modest way, they need to be blamed for whatever happens to them, right? Something very offensive I commonly see in social media, probably you've seen something like that before, or probably you're not on like Arab pages, Facebook, something like that, like a metaphor that tries to advocate for hijab by putting two pictures, a picture of an exposed candy and a picture of a wrapped candy with the exposed candy with the flies around it. This is very offensive, I would say. It's offensive both to men and women, right? Women are not candy and men are not flies. So unfortunately, I've seen this personally so many times, and even some of my students shared their concerns with me. It's an objectification to both men and women, doesn't show respect to both men and women, let alone doesn't show any real understanding of modesty. Modesty is a one way, according to the Quran, to communicate your personality, to speak about yourself. Doesn't replace behavior, right? Doesn't replace verbal behavior. It's one tool out of other tools that you can use to speak about your personality, to speak about yourself. Also, it's a claim of your ownership to your body. I would take it in a world that keeps insisting on objectification of women's body. It comes as a resistance, as a proactive reaction to that world where women share men's world, but without sharing an aspect that some insist on highlighting in a way that it replaces everything else. If I'm a judge, it doesn't matter to me if I'm a sexy judge or not. I want to be qualified as a judge in the first place, right? Doesn't mean that women who take other decisions or who express themselves in a different way are less virtuous than that, right? You can choose the way to express yourself. But if you want to add more to the way, make it more easy for you to be yourself, to be true to yourself, Muslim women are recommended to consider that, right? So in a society where men and women are observing God and God's commands, where the Quran is not addressing criminals and rapists and predators here, right? So it's not either you wear hijab or you can be harassed. How can we conclude that? We can conclude it just by going to the word أ.د. itself, right? Which I try to share with you today. So with these examples, maybe I can end and then we open it to questions. But let me end by maybe repeating myself a little bit and saying and asserting again that approaching the text armed with ideologies, pre-existing agendas, and even prejudices, no matter what these might be, does not and cannot provide us a true approach to the Quran, or an interpretation that we can claim it's Quranic. It's the text that should speak for itself. Otherwise, we're going to be trapped forever in recycling our perspectives and projecting them on the text, replacing what we think of today as obsolete readings of the text with more modern readings, because we like our modern readings, because we prefer our readings to classical and old interpretations, is worthless as long as we fail to respond to the text itself. Because our own interpretations now, which we take to be very progressive, they're gonna sound very obsolete to others as well. Just give them 10 years and people will look at us and say, what were these people thinking, right? So what we see as very modern, as very fitting today, won't be the same after 100 years, 10 years, or even 5 years. Patriarchy arrested the text and marginalized its message, its general message, by locking its open meaning to specific times, places, and social norms. Now, the key to lead us out of the maze shouldn't and can't be found in any external authority, no matter how progressive this authority might sound. Rather, the way out of the text lays in the text itself. The text is the only key. To stay objective, I would say, the text is the only key to unlock the text. Therefore, I use the Quran to decode the lost gender egalitarianism of the Quran. And this is the way I approach the Quran as a woman.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan. This is so much food for thought, both on the specific content you bring up, but also for how we're approaching this question generally in our class. I think it was very, very rich, and coupling it with your text makes it even more exciting. So I'm sure already have a lot of questions. So what I'm going to do, because we only have about 25 minutes or so, is maybe we take 2 or 3 questions together, and then we can turn to the answers, and then do that maybe once or twice if we can. So please feel free to raise your hand, and then I can call on you. So we'll start with Daniel. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My question is about social media and modesty. So it's a trend on social media and on apps like Instagram or TikTok to share a lot of your personal life and also of your body. For example, pictures of someone dancing or going to the beach in swimming gear, or at the gym working out. And I can imagine from a Quranic perspective, this could be considered as immodest. Also because people can comment on those videos and say like, oh, you're hot, or like, you look so good. So I would like to know what's your opinion on this from your perspective. And also, would it change if someone doesn't want to be modest? So if someone is young and beautiful and feels a need to express themselves.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Very important questions. Probably you're asking the wrong person. I took personally the decision to stay out of social media. I don't have any social media account. And I know I'm not preaching for this as the decision that everyone should take, right? Many people, when they hear that, they like, you're acting as a dinosaur, right? Everyone are connecting to everyone through social media these days. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of comments. Sometimes they're nice, and I know people go after, when you post something, you expect something nice, right? But the world is full of people suffering, people sometimes commenting in a bad way, not because it's relevant to you, because they have issues in their lives and they just want to project that on you. But the question is why to deal with all of that, right? Some people can be empowered by social media, I agree. I take social media as only a way to promote business, not to promote personality. So we have UNL Arabic social media, Facebook, Instagram. We share with the students flyers about coming classes. I advertise for things, but I don't advertise for people, because I'm not a commodity. I'm not an object that you can label me by your comment by saying, this is nice, so I internalize it. Yes, I'm nice. What if someone says something bad, right? I know that usually don't worry about that, don't care about them, but we're human beings, right? If people keeps commenting and saying bad things, that will affect your day. At least it's going to put you in a bad mood. I take social media as seriously affecting our happiness, our way of evaluating ourselves, because this is an era where you take routes to come back to your authentic self. So you go through everyone's evaluation to come back to yourself. If people say bad things, you will internalize that. If people say good things, you will internalize that. I believe, we should set ourselves free from this vicious circle. You should start from yourself, stand up for yourself. Even if everyone, say boo to you, you take a decision, you stick up to your decision, you stand up for your decisions, for your lifestyle, for your shape, for anything. Don't seek validations from others. So social media for me is a big no-no. And I apologize, I'm the wrong person to be asked about this. I take it only if I'm marketing for something, buying, selling something, including I have a big event at Nebraska University. I want everyone to know about it. But if I'm going on a vacation with husband and kids, I don't want people to evaluate that and tell me about that. Doesn't matter. It doesn't add anything to them. Doesn't take or add anything to me, right? About the other important question you asked, which is empowering, self-empowerment by using your body. I don't say it's not out there, right? We all want to look in a professional way, appropriate way. Being modest doesn't mean you want to look ugly, right? You're giving a message about yourself. So yes, you dress up really well. You want to look in a way that fits your personality. That's totally valid, right? What I am conservative a little bit about is when people take it to the extreme, like the value is placed on women's bodies alone, right? When people take it to this extreme, because women are not only bodies. They're told times and times again in media, in ads, in everything, that they're only body, but doesn't exhaust what women are. It might be an additional thing to add, but it shouldn't be everything, right? There are alarming numbers out there of women internalizing the message. According to one survey, 97% of American women think of themselves as ugly, right? Which is very alarming. Why? Because you're non-stop comparing yourself to not even realistic images, to Photoshops out there. You're comparing yourselves to models. Their job, their lifestyle is just taking care of your bodies. We have other jobs. I can't have 24/7 job taking care of the way I look, right? But when I'm asked to compare myself to those models, it's not going to come back reflecting good on me. I hope I addressed some of your questions, Danielle.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. But again, this is a huge topic. We can't be fair to it just by a quick question and answer.
Laila, please go ahead. You're muted still.
I'm sorry, I thought this question is a bit related. You talk so about sexual modesty, and I hear a lot about the negative sides of sexuality and the objectification and the internalized unrealistic body standards and stuff. And I certainly agree that exists. I do not deny it, but I was wondering, what about the positive sides of sexuality? Such as, like, I hear in the West a lot that there's a lot of self-expression, freedom to explore, gaining self-knowledge, and that those can be positive sides of sexuality. And I was wondering, how would you say the Quran's view is on sexuality? Like I am a bit trained to think in ways of either sex positive or sex negative, or a sex neutral or something. And I was wondering, how do you think the Quran views sexuality, and could there maybe be a place in Islam for sex positivity? And also, how would that relate to feeling? So that there are maybe lots of questions, but I was very interested.
Yeah, very interesting questions. Actually, I know that when it comes to religion, Islam or any other religion, we think that religions frown upon sexuality, right? We think that it's part of our personality, it's part of a joy that probably either religions have an issue with or they don't address. Actually, in the Quran, there is a guidance on intimacy, a guidance on healthy sexuality. And this is part of the lecture I addressed to another class in Texas, just 2-3 days ago. Because part of providing guidance on marriage and the ultimate goal for marriage in the Quran is reaching tranquility. Why you get yourself dedicated to one person for the rest of your life, because you want to be true to yourself. You want to reach tranquility. Part of reaching tranquility is reaching tranquility in sexuality, which means sexuality or intimacy should be fulfilling to both partners, right? And the Quran goes into providing, not only addressing the topic, but providing advice for women, providing advice for men. For women, it's part of what I mentioned today. It's avoiding sex while you're in menstruation. It's a celebration of love. Pick the right time, pick the right day of the month, right? And this is addressed to women, but more importantly, there is a condition addressed to men and says in the Quran, send something good ahead of yourselves, which means prepare your partner for a fulfilling, intimate relationship by affirming love first. There is a kind of gap in intimacy. Many women complain about it seems as if sometimes I'm not feeling enough appreciated, right? And men are way less demanding when it comes to sexuality. Emotionally, I would say demanding. Women are way more demanding. So a woman needs to feel loved, appreciated first to be able to enjoy a healthy intimacy, right? You need to send gifts, you need to affirm love verbally many times. You need to be on your best behavior before you expect her to be in the mood. I'm not saying men are more hypersexual than women, a myth that patriarchy used to justify polygamy, right? But I'm saying to be on the same page, there is a gap just in readiness, in being in the mood, that many times it's related to feelings. You mentioned feelings, and this reminded me of this. So yes, this is only some examples. There is a whole guidance in the Quran on embracing healthy sexuality, because at the end of the day, if your ultimate goal is tranquility, you need to be true to your needs, including your intimate needs.
Thank you. That was a very beautiful answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A very beautiful question indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Who'd like to go next? Marlies, please.
I also have a question related to modesty and wearing the hijab. I was wondering, you say that wearing the hijab can be seen as a symbol or a signal, perhaps even, that you are serious about relationships. However, if in a current society where Muslim women are living, this symbol is misunderstood or misinterpreted, what is the value of still continuing to wear the hijab? Because in the Netherlands, many people see a woman with a hijab and think she's backwards. She's dominated by her husband or by her family, and they don't see it as an individual choice communicating a certain message.
Right, a very important question. And I like when we don't shy away from serious topics. That's very true, that's very true. Muslim women are now harassed for veiling, for wearing hijab. And therefore, when I see a veiled Muslim woman, I immediately think she's brave. She's courageous, she's brave. Because here's the thing, there's a price for whatever you choose in life. There's a price, you pay a price, no matter what. I have friends who went with no hijab, but they still have Middle Eastern features. They were harassed for the Middle Eastern features, even without hijab. And they had people in some countries telling them, go back to your home country. They were not wearing hijab. So what do you do next? So I take off my hijab to satisfy the strangers on the street. Now, what should I do with my Middle Eastern features, right? What should I do with my personality? So instead of trying to please the others, I see happiness in being true to yourself. So you stand up for your values. And guess what? When you believe in yourself, everyone will believe in you. As a woman in academia, I had this dialogue in my head, like beyond what I can share with you. I lost the count with it. Every time you apply for something or you go to a job interview, you think to yourself, would there be an Islamophobe there in the job interview? But again, you stand up for yourself. You choose what you go with. There is a price for every choice you take in life. So at least pay a price to what you believe in. And I see, because of a brave woman standing up for their values, I see this negative image, at least here in the United States, is it changing? It's a responsibility. If some of us don't, choose to take that responsibility, the negative image will never change. But when you're there, when you accept yourself, people accept you. I lost the count with how many talks I gave here in Lincoln, Nebraska for churches. I was never offended for wearing hijab, but people, yes, keep asking questions about hijab. And it's a responsibility. I enjoy it. You're representing something. You stand up for something. Is it a price? Yes, like everything in life is a price. And I take it not to demonize women who don't take that choice. I mean, Muslim women. It's hard. It's hard to be there. Like, here's the thing. Hijab is a social announcement, public announcement of your beliefs, right? And you share it up front. You share it even before the person on the other side of the communication know about you or you know about them. I have my picture with hijab even on my email, and I'm choosing not to change it or put a flower or something or no picture, because I want to be myself, right? I want to be myself. Not to demonize women who can't go through this battle. It's hard. And it's like, I take it as a crown, It doesn't go on every head, okay? You don't want to fight that battle? No worries, we will fight that battle for you. And people, when you trust humanity in people, like they give you a chance, right? A woman in academia, a woman 15 years in the United States, you've heard about Islamophobia. I've never ever had any incident with anyone, either in the street or in my job or in a talk, harassing me for hijab. But you need to be open to others, so others open up to you as well. You need to be there, to stand up for yourself, and then wait what will happen next. And this applies not only to standing up for modesty as something I believe in, it applies to standing up for anything in life you believe in. If I regret, I'm in my 40s, if I regret anything in life, I regret times when I failed myself by not standing up for myself. I don't regret times when I stood up for myself, right? Because otherwise, what's the meaning of your existence? What is the meaning of it? You just want to get along with others, right? But it's a misunderstanding, exactly as you mentioned. People think she's oppressed, someone is forcing hijab on her. But this is changing, because at least in the West, people now know that women can be veiled and can be unveiled, and no one has the authority to force anything on them. So when they choose it for themselves, there must be a reason for that. And through dialogue, I see positive change in the way women are thought of, Muslim women. including veiled Muslim women? Thank you for a very important question.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Who'd like to go next? Yes, Seema.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hassan. What I like about your talk, at least how I understand it, is that you can never use the Quran to suppress any Muslim person, but you can, if you do your job well, use the Quran to like liberate yourself from any suppressing movement that is actually happening, if I'm correct. But that's not what my question is about. It's about something else. Yesterday was King's Day in the Netherlands. This is a tradition that we have because it was our king's birthday, and before our king it was the queen, etc. So and on King's Day people dress up in orange, and it's like a big party. Everybody is celebrating, people wearing hats or anything in orange. And there are markets as well. And on this market, I just went outside the house, and I live in Rotterdam, which is a very culturally diverse city. So there are many Muslims here. And I thought to myself, okay, it would be fun to see maybe if some Muslim women wore an orange hijab, right? But there were none. So I saw none, but still the question occurred to me. So, and then funnily enough, today we have the opportunity to ask a question about this. So would it be deemed maybe inappropriate by, or maybe I should rephrase, would it be acceptable for a Muslim woman to wear a hijab, which is maybe a sign of modesty, for like a festive occasion? And moreover, it's not only a festive occasion, but it's also because of the king's birthday, which might represent an authoritarian figure. Is that like a problem in the sense of like Tawhid, or that you see something else as having authority over you other than God?
Right. And to be honest with you, it breaks my heart that no veiled woman was out there with an orange hijab to show solidarity, right? And this is an attitude that I see even among immigrants here. Many times it's a responsibility to show brotherhood and cultural assimilation. There is nothing in religion that prevents you from being, for example, in my case, being a good American and a good Muslim. I have 3 boys. I raised them not to be 3 Muslims, good Muslims, but 3 good American Muslims. So it's part of your Islam, I would say, to feel connection with people around you. But it's something common to all immigrant communities. There's this fear of losing the loss of their identity, right? So we're a minority. We're surrounded by others. So we get very strict about our norms, our culture, but religion is not a culture. So there is nothing wrong by being part of the culture where you live in. And this is a responsibility not only of Muslim communities in the West, but of their imams to tell them that you can save what is beautiful about your religious identity, but not to mix it with your cultural identity. We come from other cultures. Our cultures mean nothing to our kids, completely nothing, right? You raise them to fall in love with the culture they're raised in. Otherwise, they're gonna have an identity crisis, They will live in a place, in a sad place, where they live in like with a community without feeling, authentic feelings towards that community. You're just projecting your dreams on your kids and on yourself. Personally, I'm from Syria. So a long time ago, I lost the hope of going back to Syria. I started a new life here, and I took a decision. This is my life here. I'm going to be happy here. We celebrate Christmas the way we celebrate Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Who hates more celebrations? Who hates more gifts, right? My kids like that. They're spoiled because they get gifts all year with all occasions and events. Who hates that, right? So I'm very shocked and sad that the Muslim in your neighborhood, the Muslims are not choosing to participate like everyone else in a celebration that means something probably to the majority of you, right? I take it as showing solidarity, showing love to others, right? Speaking their own language, speaking their own culture. So Muslims shouldn't be only demanding you should be fair to us all the time and playing this victim card all the time. They should reach out to others as well. It's a mutual responsibility there. And I'm saying it with love because only then you can be happy where you are. Don't live in a place just nostalgic about your lost days in another place and try to force that on your kids, right? Because you're losing your identity. Again, a true Islamic identity is a universal identity. And this, I can link this to my introduction today. The Quran speaks a very general language. The Quran won't limit the way you live, the style you live, as long as the ideals, right? Ihsan, beautifying your behavior, morals, justice, right? Being fair to others. As long as you're observing the generalities in the Quran, you're good. You're good to live in any culture. So misunderstanding the Quran or the Islamic religion with the Islamic culture is what leading to these problems I see in the West.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can maybe just add a small point on the orange hijab, it's very difficult to make orange work on most skin tones. So that's also something to keep in mind. But the answer that Dr. Hassan gave is much better.
I should admit it's a brave color.
It's a brave color.
But I would wear it. I would wear it.
But so we are unfortunately out of time. It was really a really great discussion with Dr. Hassan. Please join me in thanking her for her presence. And maybe I can share your email if anyone's interested in staying in touch. I know we had a lot more questions, so feel free if you'd like to get in touch with Dr. Hassan. I can post her email on Brightspace after.
Thank you for the invitation and for the nice questions from your awesome audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And so I'll have this recording on Brightspace soon. And I wanted to also remind us we don't have class next week, which you probably remember as well, everyone. And then we meet again the week after. Does that sound good? Okay. And Dr. Hassan, maybe you want to stay on board and we have a chat for a few minutes after everyone leaves. But otherwise,
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. And we see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.